The space station called the Gilded Nebula floated in the darkness between stars like a diamond made of cruelty and greed. It was a place where the rich and powerful came to feel like gods, and where the conquered came to serve them on broken knees. The station orbited a pleasure world called HFY, and it was famous across 100 star systems for two things. First, it served the finest food and drink the credits could buy. Second, it staffed its restaurants and casinos entirely with species that had once been apex predators on their home worlds. This was the joke that the Therian Empire loved most of all. Therians were insectoid beings with hard shells and clicking mandibles, and they had built their civilization on one simple idea: find the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy and break them and make them serve drinks and clean floors and bow their heads. It made the Therian nobles feel powerful beyond measure to watch a dragon pour their win. Serana was one of those dragons. She belonged to a species called the Drakeveth, and her people had once ruled a world called Ashenmoor, where fire fell from the sky and the mountains themselves were alive with flame. The Drakeveth had been warriors and poets and builders of cities that touched the clouds. That was before the Therians came. Now, Serana wore a uniform that was too tight and shoes that pinched her clawed feet and a collar around her neck that would shock her if she moved too fast or spoke too loud. Her scales had once been the color of violet gemstones, but years of suppressant injections had made them dull and gray. The injections kept her fire glands dormant because the Therians did not want their servants breathing flame. They wanted them broken and quiet and afraid. Serana limped between the tables of the main restaurant, carrying trays that were too heavy and smiling at customers who saw her as less than an animal. Her right leg was fractured in two places. This had happened 3 weeks ago when a drunk patron had pushed her down a flight of stairs for fun. The medical staff on the station could have healed her in an hour, but her manager had forbidden. The limping dragon reminds the customers who is really in charge, he had said with a smile that made Serana want to tear out his throat. But she could not do that. The collar would kill her before she raised a claw. So she limped and she served, and she swallowed her pride like poison every single day. On this particular evening, the restaurant was full of the worst kinds of people. Therian nobles and their guests laughed too loud and drank too much and found endless ways to make the servers miserable. At table 17 sat the worst of them all. Lord Waitress was a Therian of high birth, with a shell that gleamed like polished obsidian and eyes that held nothing but contempt for every living thing. He was the nephew of the sector governor, which meant he could do almost anything he wanted without consequences, and what Lord Waitress wanted most was to make others suffer. He had been drinking for 4 hours, and Serana had been assigned to his table because the manager thought it was funny every time she approached. Waitress found a new way to humiliate her. He made her kneel to take his order. He made her stand on one leg while reciting the menu. He threw food at her and laughed when she flinched. Other patrons watched and smiled because this was entertainment to them. Serana endured it all with her eyes down and her heart full of cold fire that she could never release. In the corner of the restaurant, there was a booth that most people ignored. The occupant appeared to be a Therian merchant of no particular importance. He wore plain clothes and sat alone and nursed a single drink for hours. Nobody looked at him twice. This was exactly what Marcus Cole wanted. Marcus was not a Therian, was not even close. He was a human from a planet called Earth, and he was very far from home. 3 months ago, his survey ship had been caught in a spatial anomaly and thrown halfway across the galaxy. He had crashed on a small moon and barely survived, and had spent weeks repairing his emergency beacon while waiting for rescue that might never come. He had made his way to HFY, looking for work and passage to anywhere closer to human space. The problem was that humans were a myth to most of the galaxy. Earth was listed in the databases as a Class 12 death world, which meant it was considered too dangerous for intelligent life to evolve there. The radiation was too high and the gravity was too strong, and the predators were too numerous, and the climate was too unstable. No species could possibly survive such a hellscape, and yet humans had not only survived but thrived. Marcus had learned very quickly to hide what he was. He wore a holographic shroud that made him look Therian, and he kept his head down, and he watched, and he learned. What he learned made him sick. The Therian Empire was built on slavery and cruelty, and the complete destruction of any species that might challenge them. They had conquered the Drakveth, and the Molvari, and the Chelaxians, and dozens of others. They had broken proud warriors and turned them into servants, and they did it all with smiles on their faces. Marcus had seen many terrible things in his life. Earth was not a gentle world, and humans had done terrible things to each other throughout their history. But there was something about watching Serana limp between tables with her broken leg that made something dark and angry wake up in his chest. He watched Lord Velcris throw wine in her face, watched her apologize for being too slow to dodge. He watched the other patrons laugh, and he felt his hands curl into fists under the table. Marcus knew he should stay hidden. He knew that revealing himself could mean death or worse. He knew that one human against an entire empire was suicide. But there was an old saying on Earth that his grandmother used to repeat: evil wins when good people do nothing. Marcus watched Serana limp back toward the kitchen with wine dripping from her dull scales, and he made a decision. He was done doing nothing. He did not know it yet, but that decision was about to change the galaxy forever. The evening grew worse as Lord Velcris continued to drink. Every glass of Therian wine made him meaner, and every laugh from his companions made him bolder. He had discovered that hurting Serana brought him joy, and he intended to explore that joy as deeply as possible. The other servers tried to stay away from table 17, but the manager kept sending Serana back. She was the entertainment now. The whole restaurant was watching her like she was a show put on for their amusement. Marcus sat in his corner booth and felt the anger building inside him like pressure in a sealed container. He had spent 3 months on this station, and he had seen cruelty before, but tonight was different. Tonight felt like a line being crossed. Serena returned to table 17 carrying a bowl of traditional Therian soup. It was served boiling hot, as was the custom, and steam rose from its surface in delicate curls. Her hands were shaking from exhaustion and pain and fear. Lord Velcris saw her coming, and a terrible smile spread across his face. He turned to his companions and said something that made them laugh. Then he stood up from his chair. Serana froze in place because she had learned that when Velcris stood it meant pain was coming. She tried to speak, but no words came out. A collar hummed against her throat, warning her to stay calm. Velcris walked toward her slowly, enjoying every moment of her fear. "You took too long," he said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The whole restaurant went quiet. Servers stopped moving, and patrons leaned forward, and even the music seemed to fade away. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Climax of the evening's entertainment. Sayaran tried to apologize, but Velcris did not let her finish. He swept his arm across the tray and knocked the boiling soup directly onto her chest and arms. The pain was incredible. Asira screamed as the scalding liquid burned through her uniform and seared her already damaged scales. She dropped the march tray and stumbled backward, and her broken leg gave out beneath her. She fell hard onto the polished floor, and the sound of her body hitting the ground echoed through the silent restaurant. The patrons watched with eager eyes. Some of them were recording on their personal devices. This was content that would get many views on the galactic networks. Serana tried to get up, but her leg would not support her weight. The burns on her chest were throbbing, and she could smell her own scales cooking. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the soup that still dripped from her chin. Velcris stood over her like a god, looking down at an insect. Was enjoying this more than anything he had enjoyed in years. The power he felt was intoxicating. Here was a creature that had once been a dragon, and now she crawled at his feet, and wept. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but in the silent restaurant everyone heard it. "Please do not kick me," looked up at him with eyes that had once held the fire of 1,000 suns. Now they held only pain and fear and desperate hope. "I am hurt," she said. Palace O'Crease smiled, and his mandibles clicked together with pleasure. "That," he said, "is precisely the point." He drew back his leg to deliver a kick that would shatter what remained of her broken bones. The moment stretched out like time itself had slowed down. Serana closed her eyes and waited for the impact that never came. Instead, she heard a sound like thunder and felt the floor shake beneath her. She opened her eyes and saw something impossibly. Figure had crossed the entire restaurant in the span of a heartbeat. Holographic shroud that had hidden him was flickering and dying and revealing something underneath that made no sense. He was not Therian. Was something else entirely. His skin was pale and smooth without scales or shells or armor. His eyes were forward-facing like a predator, but his face held an expression of such cold fury that even Waitress stepped back. The creature had caught Waitress by the leg. He was holding the Therian noble in place with one hand like it was nothing. Waitress weighed no more than a child. Someone in the crowd screamed, "What is that?" Marcus did not answer. He was looking at Waitress with eyes that promised violence. His grip tightened on the Therian's leg, and everyone in the restaurant heard the crack of chitin beginning to fracture. Waitress made a sound that was half scream and half whimper. His exoskeleton was supposed to be nearly unbreakable. It was designed to withstand impacts and weapons and the harshest environments, and this creature was crushing it with his bare hand. She asked nicely, Marcus said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent room like a blade. "So, I'm going to ask nicely, too." Looked directly into Waitress's eyes once. The Therian noble had never known fear like this. He had spent his entire life at the top of the food chain, surrounded by servants and guards, and the protection of his family name. Now he was face to face with something that looked at him like he was prey. "What are you, Waitress?" whispered. Marcus smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. "I'm human," he said, "from Earth, and I am done watching." He released Waitress's leg, and the Therian stumbled backward, clutching his cracked limb around the restaurant. The other patrons were frozen in shock and terror. The word human meant nothing to most of them, but the way this creature moved and the strength he had displayed and the look in his eyes told them everything. They needed to know they were not the apex predators anymore. Something worse had just walked into the room. Marcus turned away from Waitress and knelt beside Serana. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. Cold fury was replaced by gentle concern. "Can you stand?" he asked. His voice was soft, now almost kin. Serana stared at him with wide eyes. Her mind was trying to process what she had just witnessed. This being had appeared from nowhere and stopped a Therian noble with his bare hands, and now he was kneeling beside her like she mattered. "What are you?" she asked. "I told you," Marcus said with a small smile, "I am human." He offered her his hand. "I am getting you out of here." Behind them, Lord Waitress was screaming for his guards. The moment of shock was ending and violence was about to begin. But Marcus did not seem worried. He helped Serana to her feet and turned to face whatever was coming. For the first time in years, Serana felt something she had forgotten existed: hope. The bodyguards came through the crowd like missiles made of muscle and rage. There were 4 of them, and they belonged to a species called the Kralvex. The Kralvex were the most feared mercenaries in the galaxy. They stood 7 feet tall with tusks like daggers and arms thick as tree trunks and skin that could stop most bladed weapons. Their reputation was legendary. In 300 years of recorded combat, no Kralvex warrior had ever lost a fight to an unarmed opponent. They had crushed rebellions and assassinated kings and toppled governments, and now all 4 of them were moving toward Marcus with murder in their eyes. The restaurant patrons scrambled to get out of the wait tables, were knocked over, and drinks were spilled, and someone was screaming about calling security. None of it mattered. The Kralvex were here, and that meant the strange creature was about to die. Marcus watched them approach with the calm of a man who had seen worse, and he had seen worse. Earth was not a kind world. His species had spent millions of years fighting everything from saber-toothed cats to each other. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. They had climbed to the top of the food chain on a planet that was actively trying to murder them every single day. 4 large aliens with tusks did not frighten Marcus Cole. They annoyed him. The first Kralvex reached for a weapon at his belt, but Marcus was faster. He moved with a speed that should not have been possible for a creature his size. One moment, he was standing still, and the next he was inside the Kralvex guard. His hand closed around the alien's wrist and twisted. Snap of breaking bone echoed through the restaurant. The Kralvex screamed and dropped his weapon, and Marcus was already moving. He drove his elbow into the second guard's throat with enough force to collapse the windpipe. The third guard swung a massive fist at his head, but Marcus ducked under it and delivered 3 rapid punches to the alien's midsection. Each punch landed with the sound of meat being tenderized. Kralvex doubled over, and Marcus grabbed his head and brought his knee up into the alien's face. Tusks shattered like glass. The fourth guard hesitated. Had watched 3 of his brothers fall. In less than 5 seconds, he was a veteran of 50 campaigns, and he had never seen anything like this. The creature in front of him was not fighting like any species. He knew there was no wasted movement, and no hesitation, and no mercy. This was not combat. This was extermination. Marcus looked at the last guard with cold eyes. The Kralvex made a decision. He ran Marcus, let him go, turned back to the restaurant, and found every single patron staring at him in absolute horror. Lord Waitress was on the ground, clutching his cracked leg and whimpering. His bodyguards were scattered around the floor in various states of injury. The entire fight had taken 11 seconds. Marcus was not even breathing hard. He walked back to where Serana was standing, and she looked at him like he was some kind of monster or perhaps some kind of god. How she whispered, "How did you do that?" Marcus shrugged. "I am human," he said simply. "That is how we arrest." Serana shook her head in disbelief. "The Kralvex are unbeatable," she said. "They have conquered worlds, so have we," Marcus replied. "The difference is we started on a world that was already trying to conquer you." Offered her his arm for support. "Can you walk?" Serana tested her weight on her broken leg and winced, but nodded. "I can try." "Good," Marcus said, "because we need to leave before the doors to the restaurant burst open and a squad of armored soldiers poured in. They wore the black and gold of station security, and they carried weapons that could punch through starship hulls. Their commander was a scarred Therian with one eye missing and mandibles that had been replaced with metal. His name was Overseer Krath, and he was responsible for keeping order on the Gilded Nebula. He surveyed the destruction with cold fury. The unconscious Kralvex guards and the cowering patrons, and the strange creature standing in the middle of it all. "You," he said, pointing at Marcus. "What are you, and what have you done?" Marcus did not answer immediately. He was counting the soldiers, 12 in total, plus the overseer, all armed and armored and trained. The odds were not good, but Marcus had faced worse odds before I stopped a man from kicking a woman while she was down. Marcus said calmly, "If that is a crime on this station, then your laws need work." Waitress laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lord Waitress is nephew to the sector governor," he said. "You have assaulted a noble of the Therian Empire. You will be made an example." He gestured to his soldiers. Taking the soldiers moved forward, but Marcus did not move. He stood completely still with his arms at his sides, but something in his posture made the soldiers slow down, something that whispered of danger. Serana watched the soldiers hesitate, and she felt something strange happening around her. The other servers had stopped running. The Drakeveth and the Molvari and the Chalaxians were watching the scene with wide eyes. They had spent years being beaten and broken and humiliated. They had learned to bow and scrape and accept their fate. But now they were seeing something impossible. A single being was standing against the might of the Therian. Empire, and he was not afraid. One of the Drakefest servers set down his tray. Sound was small, but in the silent restaurant it seemed very loud. Then another server did the same, and another, and Anatharchris looked around and saw the servants watching. Their collars beeped warnings, but they did not kneel for. The first time in decades, they were not running away. They were waiting to see what would happen next. Marcus smiled. Your empire, he said to Kreth, is built on the idea that you are the biggest monsters in the room. He stepped forward, and the soldiers stepped back. You are not. You never were. You just never met anything from a Class 12 death world before Chris' tactical display was screaming warnings at him. The biometric readings from this creature made no sense. Heart rate, perfectly calm body temperature, suggesting a metabolic furnace bone. Density triple the galactic standard. What is a Class 12 death world? Kreth asked Serana. Answer before Marcus could. It means, she said, and her voice was stronger than it had been in years that his world tried to kill him. Every single day of his life she looked at Marcus with something like wonder, and he won. The restaurant had become a battlefield of Wilson. One side stood Overseer Kreth and his 12 armored soldiers with weapons drawn and orders to capture or kill on. The other side stood a single human with no armor and no weapons and absolutely no fear, and in between stood something that neither side had expected. The servants were not running. This was unprecedented. Control collars around their necks were designed to keep them obedient through pain and fear. The collars were beeping warnings, and some of the servants were wincing from small shocks, but they were not leaving. They were watching. Zirina felt something awakening inside her that she had thought was dead forever. It started as a warmth in her chest where her fire glands had been dormant for years. The suppressant injections were supposed to keep them inactive permanently, but something about this moment was breaking through the chemical chains. She looked at Marcus and she looked at the other servants, and she understood something important. They had all been waiting for someone to stand up first, waiting for proof that resistance was possible, waiting for hope. Krith saw the servants watching, and he did not like what he saw. He was a veteran of 100 suppressions, and he knew the signs of rebellion. The quiet defiance in their eyes was more dangerous than any weapon. We need to end this now, he thought. Kill the creature and restore order before this spreads. He raised his weapon and pointed it at Marcus. Last chance, he said. Surrender or die. Marcus looked at the weapon with something like curiosity on Earth. The weapon would be impressive. It was a plasma projector capable of burning through steel. But Marcus had spent his life around weapons. He knew that the person holding the weapon mattered more than the weapon itself, and Kreth was afraid. Marcus could see it in the way he held the gun, and the way his mandibles twitched, and the way his soldiers kept glancing at each other. They had seen what he did to the Kralvix. They knew they were facing something outside their experience. Fear makes people make mistakes. Let me tell you something about humans, Marcus said. His voice was calm and conversational, like he was discussing the weather. We evolved on a planet where everything wanted to kill us. The animals wanted to eat us, and the plants wanted to poison us, and the weather wanted to freeze us, or burn us, or drown. You took a step forward, and 2 soldiers took steps backward. We should have died out 1,000,000 years ago, but we did not. Do you know Waitress did not answer? He was trying to calculate angles and distances and odds. None of the numbers made sense, because Marcus continued, we are too stubborn to die. When the world tried to kill us, we killed it back. When predators hunted us, we hunted them to extinction. When the ice came, we built fires. When the fires came, we built shelters. When we ran out of room on our world, we built ships and went to other worlds. He was close now, close enough that Kreth could see every detail of his face, the forward-facing eyes of a predator, and the set jaw of a fighter, and the absolute certainty that he would win. We are the monsters that other monsters have nightmares about, Marcus said quietly, and your empire just kicked one of my friends. So now I'm going to show you what happens when humans get angry. Krith fired. The plasma bolt should have burned through Marcus liked paper, but Marcus was not where the bolt went. He had moved the instant he saw Kreth's trigger finger. Titan humans had evolved to read body language because their survival depended on predicting what other creatures would do. Marcus could see attacks coming before they happened. He closed the distance to Kreth in 2 steps and grabbed a weapon and twisted it out of the Therian's grip. The other soldiers fired, but Marcus was already moving again. He used Kreth as a shield, and the plasma bolts meant for him burned into the Overseer. Instead, Kreth screamed as his own soldiers shot at Marcus. Threw the dying Therian at the nearest group of soldiers, and they went down in a tangle of limbs and armor. Then he picked up a fallen weapon and started shooting back. He was not a soldier. He was a surveyor who had grown up on a colony world and learned to fight because everyone on Earth learned to fight, but he was enough. The soldiers were trained to fight species that followed predictable patterns. Marcus did not follow patterns. He moved like chaos given form and struck from angles that should have been impossible, and refused to stay still long enough to be targeted in 30 seconds. Half the security team was down. Rest were falling back toward the doors, trying to establish a defensive position, but they never got the chance. Because the servants had stopped watching. The first to move was a Drakeveth male named Korath, who had been a warrior before the conquest. Picked up a chair and brought it down on a soldier's helmet with all the strength of a species that had evolved to wrestle volcanic beasts. The second was a Mulvery female named Tessix, who had 6 arms and memories of a time when her people had been feared across star systems. She grabbed 2 soldiers and slammed their heads together hard enough to dent their helmets. The third was Syringe. Felt the warmth in her chest explode into actual heather. Fire glands were coming back online despite the suppressants, despite the collar, despite everything. She opened her mouth and a stream of violet flame poured out. It was weak compared to what she could have done before the conquest, but it was enough to set 2 soldiers on fire and send the others scrambling. The collar around her neck beeped frantically, and then sparked, and then died. The heat from her internal fires had finally overloaded it. For the first time in years, Serana could breathe without feeling the metal against her throat. She looked at Marcus, and he looked at her, and they both smiled. The remaining soldiers saw what was happening, and they made a choice. They ran. The servants let them go. There would be time for hunting later. Right now, there was something more important: freedom. The word spread through the restaurant like wildfire. The collars were failing. The suppressants were burning away. The things that had kept them broken and obedient were falling apart, and at the center of it all was a human who had refused to watch injustice and do nothing. Marcus stood in the middle of the chaos and watched the servants helping each other remove their collars. Some were crying, and some were laughing, and some were doing both at once. Serana walked up to him with fire still flickering at the corners of her mouth. "Thank you," she said. Words felt completely inadequate for what he had done, but they were all she had. Marcus shook his head. "Do not thank me yet," he said. "This is just the beginning." Looked out the observation windows at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there is a Therian fleet, and they are going to be very angry when they find out what happened here. He turned back to Serana and the other former servants. "So we need to get ready, because this war is just getting started." Serana felt her fire burning brighter than it had in years. "Then let them come," she said. "We are not afraid anymore." 6 months had passed since the night everything changed. The Gilded Nebula was no longer a place of slavery and cruelty. It was a fortress of freedom floating in the darkness between stars. The transformation had not been easy. In the days after the uprising, the Therian Empire had sent 3 fleets to reclaim the station. The first fleet had been overconfident. They expected to find a few hundred frightened servants with broken collars. Instead, they found a station that had been converted into a weapon. Marcus had spent weeks teaching the former servants how to fight and how to think like humans. Taught them about ambushes and guerrilla warfare and the art of making your enemy afraid. He taught them that size and numbers did not matter. As much as will and creativity, he taught them to be unpredictable. The first Therian fleet had been destroyed in 4 hours. Second fleet came with more ships and more soldiers and more caution. They lasted 2 days before retreating with half their forces gone. The third fleet never arrived. By then the recordings of the uprising had spread across the galactic networks. Every conquered species in the Empire had seen the footage of a human standing alone against armored soldiers, a dragon breathing fire for the first time in years, servants rising up and fighting back and winning. The message was clear: resistance was possible. The Therians had been beaten, and if they could be beaten once, they could be beaten again. Rebellions began erupting across a dozen star systems. The Drakevrath on Ashenmoor rose up and reclaimed their burning mountains. The Molvari broke free of their mining colonies and remembered how to be warriors. The Chalaxians destroyed the factories where they had been forced to build weapons for their oppressors. The Empire was burning, and it had all started with one human who refused to watch a dragon. Get Kicked Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Gilded Nebula and watched the stars. Behind him, the station hummed with activity as former servants trained for the battles to come. They had weapons now and ships and allies arriving every day from the growing rebellion, but they were still outnumbered. The Therian Empire had ruled for thousands of years, and they would not fall easily. We need help, Marcus thought. We need more humans. His emergency beacon had been broadcasting for months. Had no way of knowing if anyone had heard it. Earth was so far away and the galaxy was so vast. He might be alone out here forever. Serena found him standing at the window. Her scales had returned to their natural violet color now that the suppressants were out of her system. She moved without limping because the medical staff had finally been allowed to heal her leg. She looked like a different person from the broken waitress he had met 6 months ago. She looked like a dragon again. "You're thinking too hard," she said, standing beside him. "Is a human habit," Marcus admitted. "We think about problems until we solve them or go crazy." Sirana laughed. It was a sound he had grown to love over the past months. "We are going to win," she said. Marcus shook his head. "We are outnumbered 1,000 to 1. The Empire has resources we cannot match. They will send more fleets, and eventually," he stopped talking because something had appeared on the edge of the sensor display. Ship was dropping out of faster than light travel. Then another. Then 100 more. Marcus felt his heart stop. This was it. The Therians had finally sent a force large enough to crush them. He turned to run for the command center, but Sirana grabbed his arm. "Look," she said. She was pointing at the sensor display with wide eyes. Marcus, the ships were not Therianthi, were shaped differently with angular hulls and configurations he recognized from childhood. They were human. The largest ship in the fleet was broadcasting an identification signal. UES Defiance had said United Earthship. They had heard his beacon. They had come. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes, which was embarrassing. But he did not care. The communication system crackled to life, and a voice filled the observation deck. "This is Admiral Chun of the United Earth Navy, responding to emergency beacon 774. We received your signal 3 months ago and came as fast as we could." She paused, and there was warmth in her voice when she continued. "It is good to find you alive, Mr. Coley. We're worried." Marcus laughed and cried at the same time. "Admiral Chun," he managed to say, "you have no idea how happy I am to hear your voice." There was a sound of movement on the other end of the communication. Then Admiral Chun spoke again. "We have been monitoring local communications on our approach," she said. "We know what you have been doing out here." Her voice became harder with pride and something like wonder. "One human started a revolution that is shaking an empire. That is the most human thing I have ever heard." The fleet moved into formation around the station. There were over 200 ships ranging from small destroyers to massive carriers. It was not enough to defeat the Therian Empire on its own, but it was enough to change everything. The other species in the rebellion had been fighting with hope alone. Now they would fight with humans at their side, and humans did. Not Loza Serana stood beside Marcus as the first shuttles began launching from the human fleet. She thought about the night they had met. She thought about lying on the floor of a restaurant with a broken leg and burns on her chest. She thought about begging a Therian noble not to hurt her, and she thought about the strange creature who had appeared out of nowhere and refused to let evil win your species. She said quietly, "You are all like this. You see something wrong, and you cannot walk away." Marcus smiled. "We have a saying back home," he said. "Mess around and find out." Serana tilted her head. "I do not understand." Marcus put his hand on her shoulder and looked out at the human fleet. "It means," he explained, "that anyone who hurts innocent people will eventually meet someone who hurts them back." He grinned. "The Therian Empire has been messing around for thousands of years now. They are about to find out." The first human soldiers stepped onto the station and were greeted by cheering crowds of former servants, dragons, and 6 armed warriors, and dozens of other species welcomed them like heroes. Admiral Chun herself came to meet Marcus, and Serenish was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes and a spine made of steel. She looked at the dragon standing beside her law surveyor and smiled. "I have read the reports," she said to Serana. "You were the first to breathe fire again." Serana nodded. "Because of him." Admiral Chun shook her head. "Because of you," she corrected. "He showed you it was possible, but you made the choice that fire was always inside you." She looked around at the station full of free people. "It was inside all of you. You just needed to remember." Serana felt her flames burning bright and warm in her chest. She looked at Marcus, and then at Admiral Chun, and then at all the humans and aliens working together. For the first time in her life, she understood something important. Hope was not something that could be given to you. It was something you had to find inside yourself. But sometimes you needed someone to show you where to look. Human fleet spread out across the system, preparing for the battles to come. The Therian Empire would send more forces, and the war would be long and bloody. But standing on that station, surrounded by humans and dragons and warriors from 100 worlds, Serana knew how it would end. They would win, because humans did not know how to quit, and now neither did anyone else. The galaxy would never be the same, and it had all started with a simple act of kindness. A human had seen a dragon in pain and chosen to help. There was all it took: one person refusing to look away, one person deciding that enough was enough, one person proving that monsters could be beaten. The Therian Empire had ruled through fear for millennia, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had kicked someone who was already down, and a human had kicked back. Now the whole galaxy was kicking, and the Empire was about to fall.